Itaku Yippee. We're going to talk right now about lesson planning. The first thing to be reminded is that when we say lesson in this context, in this framework, we mean what happens in one sitting, one session of your course. So the learners come into the space, lesson begins, lesson goes on, lesson ends, learners leave the space. So that's one day, or 1 hour, or one segment of the day, perhaps, if you are working in like an elementary school where you may have the students with you all day. One lesson is they come over to the table, you work with them for maybe 20 or 30 minutes, then they go over to the next space, or you switch it out and move on to the next topic. That's one lesson. So when we're saying lesson, let's be clear. A project-based language learning unit will typically have between 5 and 15. In the upper grades, it might go as high as 20, but usually between 5 and 15 lessons that are part of achieving your public product. Each lesson is planned in a certain way. So each day, each sitting or session is planned in a certain way. If you've worked in any kind of school or instructional program, you've used lesson planning templates, and you know that there's a million different ones, and some of them are very long and complicated. Some of them are very bare bones. I've actually developed probably 5 or 6 over the years. The more complicated ones worked well for me, but other people found them really confusing. And so I've really tried to boil things down to the very minimum that people really need to be doing each day or during each session, and include that. You may have another template that you want to use, and that's fine, but I would ask you to try using this one a few times to make sure you understand all the parts of it, because even if you plan your lesson on a different piece of paper or using an app or using voice notes or some other way, that's fine, but it still needs to have all these components. And then why does it need to have all these components? Because we've said that we want the students' learning experience to be immersive, meaning we as the teacher need to be ready when they are entering, when the session is beginning, we're ready to go through everything in the language. We're also ready with our 4 Fs to provide the function of everything. We're ready to make sure they can understand us, no matter what the language chunks are that we're going to say today, meaning we've thought about, do I need a puppet? Do I need a poster? Do I need a photograph? Do I need a song? Do I need a video? What do I need to show them what these language chunks, these phrases mean? I'm ready. Doing that on the fly can often be tricky because I know what they mean, but then I try to say it to you, and then without translation, well, I could explain it in the language, but then you might not understand the explanation. It tends to get a little tricky. So prep on how I'm going to make sure that I'm ready to say everything in the language, how I'm going to be sure that they are able to understand all the key ideas in the language. That takes prep. Even when you've been at it for years and years and years. I'm giving you the templates that I also use. Even though I have the vision in my mind, I've done it 100 times, I almost always forget something. So having the template there is really helpful for me. And even if I don't physically use the template every single day, the template is operative in my mind, and it helps me every day. We want their experience to be immersive. We also want to make sure that their experience is hands-on or experiential. I say hands-on in quotes because at the definitely in the beginning, but in a lot of our teaching, they are actually physically going to use their actual hands to do things, and that's great. We want that. There are lessons that are completely interactive and where they're totally engaged and they're doing things, but those may not involve their hands. For example, if they're holding a debate on a topic that they've researched, there may not be hands-on, but it is experiential. It's them doing something. They're engaged in the act of something. It is not them sitting back and listening to us explain the language. There is a rule that I've deduced from watching language teachers over many years that you can test out and you'll see. The more teacher-centered a lesson is, the less prep time it takes. The less prep time you put into a lesson, the more teacher-centered it will be. I wish that wasn't true, because I would love to say student-centered language instruction is so much easier and it saves you time. It really doesn't, usually doesn't. It takes more prep, more thought to make sure that you've given them a really good on-ramp, really given them the tools to do the thing themselves. That takes a lot of thought. And you're generally going to need stuff, physical stuff, posters, scaffolds. You're going to need stuff to make sure that they can actually do it without you having to do it. And then they watch you or you explain, which is teacher-centered. So the more that you want them to be independent and do it on their own and get a real live experience of it, which is what we hope their language learning experience is, the more prep and thought it takes. This is a great example right now. I prepped this template. I'm prepping this video about the template so that I can give those to you and you can go out and plan your lessons. If I wanted to do no prep, I could just show up to class and say, all right, what do you want to plan a lesson about? All right, let's do it. Here's how you would do it. And this is what I used to do, because I was like, I'm so good at this. I can do this on the fly. And I would show up to class and I would say, okay, what do you want to plan a lesson about? Oh, you want to do a lesson about chopping wood? Great. Here's what you would do. Bloop, 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 bloop. We'd do it. And everyone would say, oh, wow, Anka, you're so great at lesson planning. And I would say, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then they would go off and do the lesson that I gave them, only kind of understanding it. And then, of course, the next time I say, now you plan one. And then they would just kind of get stuck and we'll be like, whoa, how do I do it again? Because I did it. It was too teacher-centered. It was too me-centered. It was too much of me. And so I'm doing this prep now so that you have all the tools you need to do it for yourself. You can stop and pause this. You can come back to this. We can chop this into pieces to get a little explanation, but then you're actually going to try it, because once you've done it a couple of times with yourself, by yourself, it's going to be obvious to you how to do it. So it takes a lot of prep to be student-centered. Also, the activities that you want to do and the language to go with them might be very familiar to you. You might be very experienced with them and it might just flow for you. But most of us who are teaching languages that are our second language, and especially when we're talking about an endangered language and an indigenous language, most of us who are teaching actually need to go check if this is how you say it. We actually need some help with our own language. We are also learners. And so this template also includes the process that you would go through to get some help from a dictionary, from an elder, preferably from an elder, but from a fluent speaker, from a more advanced language learner. You probably need some help to set it up. So it usually doesn't work to just run in there and say, well, I've got an axe, so today we're going to chop wood. And then all of a sudden you get there and you start to go through the motions of chopping the wood, and then you think, yeah, how do you say split it? Oh, how do you say, oh, the axe got stuck? How do you say that gets stuck? So we want to prep that so that you're ready. We also want to make sure that it's fun and that the students experience success. Those are usually kind of the same thing. And that, again, when we're moving away from teacher-centered, I'll just explain it to you. We're moving to student-centered. That can be kind of tricky to figure out. How do I make this fun? I mean, I'm telling you the information. The first couple of weeks, it's usually obvious how to make it fun. But as we get deeper and deeper into our course, it's often takes some real thought to think, how do I make sure that they have a successful experience? We want it to involve interactions, games, conversations, something where tasks, something where they are using the language and something is happening, someone is responding. And that takes planning. What is it going to be? How are they going to do it? And a lot of times we'll think, oh, I'm going to have them like pretend to go to a store and buy something. Yeah, that'll be great. That'll be our activity. And then you get in there and then you think, oh, what kind of story is this? Oh, it's a grocery store. Okay, just say it's a grocery store. Oh, okay. How did they say that they're how do they say that it's on sale? Oh, I'm not sure how to say things are on sale. Like, takes prep. It takes prep. Is this gonna work? Do they actually know all the phrases that you would need? Yeah, they can greet the cashier. Okay, we've taught them that. That's great. They can say the prices. Can they say things like, do you have any of this? Or we're out. Or can I order some? Do they have those? I mean, what do they need? Let's think it through. So prep is your friend. And this is here to help you prep. Even if you feel confident in what you're doing, it can be helpful. And the last reason we're using this is because we've said people need the 4 F's in order to learn new language chunks. You've got some new language chunks you want to teach them here so that they can do a thing in the language. It's great. They need those 4 F's. They don't just automatically get them. It takes thought. How are they going to get function? How are they going to get the function of, if I had any, I would give it to you, but I don't. How am I going to show them what it means? If I had any, I would give it to you. How am I going to demonstrate that or show that? Or how am I going to get the meaning of that across without translation? It takes thought. Form. You may have been really confident going into your lesson that you know how to say, I do it, I'm doing it. And then all of a sudden the situation, you're acting out the situation and you need to say, you guys are doing it. Is that does the K stay a K or does it turn into a ch? Do they know that form? Frequency. Yeah, we're going to do some choral repetition. Yeah, we're going to say the words together. But what about these things that are kind of tricky? Are they going to come back again? How are we going to make sure they're coming back again? How are we going to make sure that the things we learned 4 lessons ago come into this one? How are we going to make sure that we use as many familiar phrases, as many freebies as we can to help their comprehension? It takes thought. Feedback. How are we going to make sure that they say or do something in the language and someone responds to them? Instead of just saying, what's the other person's line going to be? And then what are they going to say back to that? Do they know those or do they need to introduce those? It takes thought. All right. So here's how to use this template. Maybe someday I'll change this template up, but it's been working the last couple of years. Here, I'll show the blank one. Like I say, I really need a template for me to do this. Now, the first thing to say about using this template is that when I am planning immersion lessons, it is a lot like being on stage in a play or acting in a movie. Before I can act in a movie, why? Because I'm creating a little world in there, right? I'm creating a little world where everything happens in a language that actually, in my daily life, it actually doesn't usually happen in that. That's why I'm teaching this language, because I want us to speak this language more. So I'm a little bit like an actor in this movie about this world where everything happens in this language. Well, before the actors jump on set and start acting and start getting recorded for a movie, what happens? Well, someone has to write the movie. Someone has to write the script. Scripting is actually a really big part of immersion teaching. Thinking through, and then I would say this, and then you would say that, and then he would say this, and then I would say that, right? Especially if it's not your first language, especially if you're a learner like me. You might have to check on how to say some of these things. So you're scripting it out. What happens before a screenwriter writes a movie? Before they sit down to write out the lines of the movie, they do some research. They do background research. They know a little bit about what they're writing about, hopefully. And they know what it would realistically sound like, where it would realistically take place, what would realistically happen. And they do that research, and then they write the script, and then they act it out. You are going to do the exact same thing. This template has a background color here at the top of gray. Envisioning the outcome is the first section. Sequencing the steps is the second section. These are your background research sections. This is before there's actors, before there's a script. When it's all concept, you are working on the concept first. So you work from top to bottom. Do not skip ahead. Work from top to bottom, backwards planning. Work on it in order. First envisioning the outcome, then sequencing the steps. The green sections are the script of the actual movie. They are what's going to happen when you are out there on stage playing your role as the language facilitator, language teacher. There's 4 green sections. You do not, segments, excuse me, you do not have to have 4 segments in every lesson, but normally a lesson would have at least 3 because you need frequency. You need to reuse the language chunks in a bunch of ways to make sure that they stick. So it's either 3 or 4 segments. When you are done scripting it, you'll go out and teach it. When you are done teaching it, when you are done running this lesson, you will come back. Very important. You will come back to your plan and you will reflect. This reflecting phase is the most valuable part of teaching. Being able to separate yourself a little bit from what just happened and look at it a little bit like scientist glasses on, look at it from a bird's eye and say, what went well and what didn't, all right? So you will reflect on it. I'm sorry, I was showing the wrong section. This is your reflection one. Before this section is, after you've planned out your 4 segments, before you feel that you're ready to go on set, before you get your actors out there and you start running the lines, there should be an editing process. And that is basically a mini reflection before the doing and then the ultimate reflection. So once you've written your 4 segments, you did your research, you wrote your 4 segments. Now it's gonna quiz you, and you're gonna look at this plan. You're gonna say, is this plan stage ready? Is this plan up to snuff? Am I happy with this plan? And these are the questions you're gonna ask yourself at a minimum. Have I planned function for every language chunk that I'm teaching? Have I planned how the meaning and appropriate use of that phrase is going to be clear to these learners so that I'm not just talking away and they're like, what? How am I going to make sure they don't use it wrong? Don't use it in the wrong scenario. Don't maybe translate it to English in their mind and then start using it the way the English phrase is when that's not how am I going to ensure that they get the right function? You look back up here, you say, have I planned that? Am I good on that? Or do I need to add, maybe I need to beef that up? Form. Have I thought about any pronunciation difficulties that they might have? Or once they're above that basic level, it's maybe more grammatical complexities. For example, if I say to them, we're going to go to a store and we're going to buy stuff, and then we say, it's a pet store. Well, now we're going to buy animate things. Do they know animacy? Have they learned how to talk about animates? And if not, maybe I need to go back and introduce that first. They might need some kind of a support to remind them how to do it, maybe a visual guide. Are they even going to know which things are talked about in animate? That's just an example, but have I thought about the forms that are going to be needed? And are they either very well known, or have I carefully introduced them and given enough examples and given enough support that they're going to be able to say the phrases in the right form? Feedback. Are they getting some feedback on their speaking in every segment? Are they experiencing, I speak, something happens. I speak, something happens. Somebody responds to me. Somebody's face lights up. Somebody hands me something. Am I getting feedback in every segment so that I've really communicated in the language? And I'm not just standing there saying, I would like to buy some bread. I would like to buy some milk. I would like to buy some cheese. I would like to buy some. No, no. I want feedback. I want to actually say, I would like to buy some bread. And then someone is going to say, we have wheat bread and white bread. Which would you like? Boom, feedback. I said something, something happened. Is that happening in every segment? And the frequency, of course. Do I have enough spiraling around? Do I have enough circularity that this is coming back in new forms? The same things are coming back in new forms, not just pure core repetition. I would like to buy some. I would like to buy some. Yes, a little bit of that, but also is it repeating and winding through, and we're using the same things over and over so that they get lots of chances to really make them stick. Change your plan if you need more of these. And then in thinking about that, you may need to think about things like, do I need to print out a visual? Or do I want to, if I'm teaching online, often I need to spend some time creating something online that they can interact with. Like, for example, I might have a PowerPoint where they can move items around so they can act out the interactions. If they're online, they may need to be able to click and drag them. Have I created that? If we're going to be pointing out different locations, do I have a map? Do I have the right kind of map that I want to display? Thinking about what kind of things do I need? Do I want to maybe write out, I would like to buy some. Would you like to buy some? Yes, I would. Maybe I want to color code that to help them follow how the phrase changes. I don't know. And then this is important. Classroom commands that you will say. Do you, as the facilitator, do you know how to say things like get into your groups, go into breakout rooms, listen to one another, try your best to answer? Do you know how to say those in the language? You may need to prep that. So those are the parts of this template. And now I'm going to go through the process of using it one by one. All right. And I'm going to show you a completed example. Research phase, envisioning the outcomes and sequencing the steps. This is before we write the script. We're just thinking about the activity. What will we do? Notice I use the word do and activities. You may not say, we will talk in the past tense. What will we do? What are we doing? What's the activity? Telling a story about last weekend is fine. That's past tense if your language has past tense. But just, oh, we're going to learn how to make nouns plural. That's a grammar lesson. That's not an activity lesson. In this method, because we want to create real speakers, we're focusing on activity-based methods. So here's an example, very simple example from a beginner level, and they can get much, much, much more complicated. In this activity, the person wants her family to learn how to ask for something to eat when they're hungry. So saying that they're hungry and saying what they want for lunch and what others want for lunch. That's what we're going to do. We're going to get ready for lunch. So they're asking for something. That's a doing, right? Asking for something and getting something, that's a doing. So that's the first thing. Now, this next section is actually very important here. So she has not filled all of them in yet, and that's fine. If you need help with certain words, we can help you. But this might be where you work with your elder, your mentor speaker. You may pull out a dictionary, whatever resources are available to you. What are the language chunks that we will say? So here you need to, just like you're writing a Hollywood movie, you need to have a good imagination. You need to picture yourself. I'm hungry. I'm a kid and there's an adult and I want this adult to make me lunch. So I'm going to walk into the kitchen and what am I going to say? I'm going to say, Ina, lo wachi. Mom, I'm hungry. And then she's going to say, Dakoya chiha. Oh, what do you want? And then I'm going to say, oh, taspan, wachin, maybe. I'm going to say, oh, I want an apple or something. So you're going to walk through it in your mind. If you are a speaker, write it out, how the phrases are going to be said. Write them all out. If you are a learner, write them all out, but you may need to stop here and get some help from a more advanced speaker, from a dictionary, from a website, from an elder. How do I say these phrases? And make sure you got that down. That's first. What are the phrases we're going to teach? Now, your interaction might involve 40 phrases, whole conversation. But we want to stick to about 7 that are new, that they haven't used before, haven't been introduced before. You can go as high as 10 if you're really feeling spicy, but 7 is the recommended number from research of what people can really retain after one lesson. So try to keep it small. You are very likely going to need to narrow down. Maybe over here you said, we're going to go grocery shopping, and then we're going to bring the groceries home, and then we're going to cook the meal, and then we're going to serve lunch, and then we're going to ask everybody how they're feeling today. Wow, wow. If they're beginners, that's 5 lessons, not 1. So if you run into trouble, just go back and edit it, shrink it down. Okay. And get the phrases that you're going to be saying. There can be as many phrases as you want, but all of them should be familiar except about 7. That's about as many new phrases as you can introduce in one sitting. Once you're good on that, break it down. What is actually going to happen in the first segment? So the first activity we're going to do, I'm going to model it for them. We're going to go around and say what we like, what we dislike. And then we're going to say what we want or don't want right now. And then what someone else wants, what someone else likes, what someone else wants. And then in the third segment, we're actually going to say, give me that. I want that. Give it to each other. Take it. And we're actually going to eat it. We're going to talk about, I'm eating this. I ate that. So even just in the simple eating of lunch, there's still 3 segments. This person did not choose to plan a 4th segment. That is okay. But your lesson may have 4 segments. It depends on the time, depends on how advanced your learners are. After 4 segments, it's been kind of a lot, and you probably want to wrap her up. So 3 or 4 segments in a lesson. Now, each segment goes through the steps of I do, we do, all of us together, the whole class. We do, meaning the students are doing it and I'm helping them. You do. The students go and do it. And I only intervene if asked. So this is called gradual release of control. You're building up their independence in whatever communication we're learning. So I model it, then they practice it with me. We do. Then they practice it and I help. We do. And then they do it. They for real interact with each other. You do. And I step back. That stepping back and letting you do is indispensable. That's why you're planning your own lessons right now. Because if it's just me modeling it, or we're just all doing it together, I don't know for sure that when they walk out that door, they can really do it. And I need to see them do it. Or I don't know how well this lesson went. And that can be really hard for teachers to let go of that control and watch. Can they do it? And if they can't, okay. Do something different tomorrow. You're learning. We're all learning. So these are the things that I'm going to say. So I actually scripted out. What am I going to say? I'm going to say, le dakuhe, le kaspan, right? This is a very simple lesson. Most of you have learned in this lesson. Most of you probably taught this lesson. And so this goes through what the teacher is going to do. And then we do is I'm going to ask the teacher, I'm going to ask them. I'm going to say, Janet, le dakuhe, oh, le kaspan. She's going to say, I'm going to say, oh, washte, right? And then there's a we do where I'm going to be more quiet and I'm going to say, Janet, ask Lewis to, what this is, or ask Lewis if He likes this, right? I'm going to say all that in the language, and then they're going to do it. But I'm right here to help. If they're like, what do I say again? I'm right here to help. So they're getting that practice. Then there's going to be some kind of an activity where they have the foods and they're going to just ask each other about them. And I am going to try my best to stay out of it unless I'm really needed. I want to see them do it. Second segment, same thing. I do, we all do together. They all do it together and I'm there supporting. And then they do it without me. All the segments go through that. So before I teach this, I answer, how am I going to give them the function of everything I want? Now, this is a beginner lesson. Most of us have seen this. Most of us have done this lesson. We know I'm going to hold up an apple. I'm going to bring in an apple. I'm going to say, Traspan. We know. Okay, great. But this still applies when you say, well, we're going to build a boat. We're going to build a boat. So I'm going to tell them which parts that they need to connect to one another, which parts they need to size appropriately. Okay, how am I going to show them the boat parts? How am I going to be sure that they understand that term when I'm saying it? Do I want to bring in boat parts? Do I want to take them out to see a boat? Because I don't want to take it apart, so I'm just go outside and look at it. Do I want to draw them? Do I want to make little cardboard little models of the boat parts? Like, what's the plan? You may know the answer, but that doesn't mean it's not important to think about. You probably do know the answer. But then also, that's for nouns. What about the verbs? Those are the most important thing, right? Verbs are the most important thing. How are you going to show the function of the verb? I've had difficulties with this basic lesson because I've had students mix up I like and I want, because those are really abstract ideas. So I've had to change it out. Like I've had to get really clear visuals. Like I like it. And I have a little cartoon that I show with some little heart popping out of their eyes. And they're going, I like it, you know. And then of course, students will say, does that mean like or love? Blow past that. But it doesn't mean want. It means like, oh, I like it, right? And then I want it has to do with, I'm trying to get it. So I have a motion for want. But I've actually started teaching want and like in separate lessons. I actually don't teach them in the same lesson because it was too easy for people to mix them up. That's a function issue. Saying it at the wrong time. So thinking through things like that. Form. So here, she wants to have the I form and the you form and the he or she form in this language, in Lakota. That's fine if your learners are ready for that. My experience with very beginner learners is that getting the difference between the I form and the you form in Lakota is really tricky. So I focus on the I, the he form, he, she form first, because they're more different. And once they get strong at those, I introduce the you form. I use the you form in front of them, but I don't actually get them to say it. Now, you might want to do that. It's up to you, but you're thinking about it. Whatever you decide, just think about it. Feedback. So she's saying, we're going to have the food. She's planning it out. We're going to have the food. And so when they ask for it, we're going to give it to them. Or when they say they like it, maybe we can have the food in a group. And when they say they like it, we can push it forward. Or maybe we can have a heart cut out on the table. We can set it on the heart. Okay, this is one that we like. But think it through. What's the feedback going to be? They said something. What's going to happen to show that they've been understood? Frequency is going to happen so that when we all say it together, like when I say Traspan, then everybody says it with me. Traspan, Traspan, Traspan. That's called choral repetition. It's like we're a choir. Na, 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 na. Very, very useful, especially at the beginning level. But anytime something is new and maybe hard to pronounce, that choral repetition is really useful because I get lots of chances to try it out with my muscles, but nobody can really hear me because we're all doing it at the same time. But that's not just the only kind of frequency that we want. So there's also, we're going to do these interactions multiple times. I, as the teacher, I'm going to ask each participant, that's a repetition. And then each participant is going to ask each other participant, that's repetition. And then we're going to switch it up and ask them more questions together, use it with different foods. Like it's going to keep coming back, keep coming back, keep coming back. So it really gets stuck in there. So that was my reflection before I did the activity. And then a deeper reflection, which of these are probably going to be hard for them? So here she's pointed out that saying things with h and h are actually really hard for Lakota learners. So she's going to probably need, as the facilitator, to slow down and say, she may have avoided them actually in her vocabulary. Yeah, she avoided them. But traspon, for example, traspon is something that's going to be really unfamiliar, and most people are just going to say taspon. So she's going to need to slow down and say, and give them a chance to try it. Spon, because they're very beginners. These are new sounds for them. So she's thinking about that ahead of time. She needs to actually go get some food. She needs to actually be prepared with the food. And she wants to have labels for things that you like, things that you want. And then they can also put labels onto with the names of the foods. Again, with labels, we still want to focus on verbs as much as possible. And then this is actually important. There's a mistake. Well, I think many of us have made up being like, all right, we're going to do less about food. Here's some food. Hold this food. Well, if I'm already holding it, then I don't have to ask you for it. So the activity kind of goes, because I'm already holding it. So we actually don't pass out the food. And we say, okay, I have this food that's over here out of your reach. What do you want? Right? I'm planning for that function. And then even though these are brand new learners, there are some, and I'm not going to give tons of long instructions. There are some things I'm going to say. I'm going to say, hiu, iotaka, iotaka. I might even say, I didn't put this on there, but I might say, anahopta pe. Ichu, take this, listen up. Okay, come here, sit down. All right, now. All right, it's your turn. Say this. These are commands that I'm going to need. As a language learner, I actually needed to check these with a speaker. Am I saying these correctly? I needed to always check them. Am I saying sit down correctly? But also, these are the things that the learners are going to be hearing a lot, which is good because eventually they'll just know them. They've heard them so many times and they've seen them in context. So they will become freebies in their language. All right. So then she ran through her lesson. She taught her 3-segment lesson, and then she reflected on what went well, which of the language chunks they could use really well at the end. They had no problem using them. And then which ones were kind of shaky. I've had the same experience. And then what didn't work well out of this plan, meaning what would I do differently next time? So yeah, I wouldn't hand them the food. I'd start with the food being over there. Or next time I would start with a simpler phrase. Or next time I would spend less time repeating that because they got it and I didn't need to spend so much time on it. These are the kind of reflections you're going to go through. And I write them down because I won't remember a year from now or 6 months from now when I teach this lesson again. So I write them down on my lesson plan, change this in the future, and I keep those. That's how you plan an activity-based lesson. So just reiterating, the gray section is not something that you're following along with in the classroom. It's your prep beforehand, you thinking of the concept, and you may need to work with your mentor or your more advanced speaker to get the phrases that you need. And then you start scripting it out. After you've scripted it out, you edit it. You reflect and say, are there things I can improve about this? Have I thought of everything? Then you go teach it. And when you are done teaching it, you come back and you reflect on it. So far, this template has been working well to get all the key parts of lesson planning together for folks. Like I say, it doesn't have to be your favorite way of doing things, but give it a try 5 or 10 times just to make sure you're really solid on all those steps and that you're carrying all those steps forward into whatever template you ultimately use on a daily basis. And it's always good, even if you get comfortable and you start to teach some sort of off-book lessons and you just are kind of rolling, it's always good to return at intervals to these and check and make sure you're really doing them so that you don't accidentally follow all of our training as, graduates or participants in colonial schooling, which is to be ever more teacher-centered. So it can help us to check ourselves and bring ourselves back to immersion and back to being student-centered. So I hope you find that helpful.